You're probably familiar with the phrase, "I always knew something was off about me in my childhood." This is the sentiment many of us in the LGBTQ community share regarding how we would eventually embark on the journey of self-discovery. Hi, my name is Maarzkid, and this is the story of how I came to use the elements of creativity and cringe to determine who the real person behind the mask has been all along. This is more about gender than anything, though I will extend my thoughts to cover other identity forms later on in the video. And on that note, it is once again June, and I want to wish you all a punk-ass pride. You're all so valid, so keep doing what you're doing, it gets better. Alright, let's hit it. I'm a furry, I guess. It's not like I almost spent $4,000 on a partial mascot of my Roo or anything. But so what's the hype? Are we all just a bunch of twisted freaks who want to get it on with animals? No, definitely not. I really hope we've moved past that notion by now. I mean, furry culture is pretty much unavoidable at this stage in our collective consciousness. It shows up in all the silly, and some not so silly, places of the internet. You'd be forgiven for having a generic wolf profile pic at some point in your past. The point is that I believe anthropomorphizing is just a product of the human condition. I mean, just look at all the historical accounts of art and religion to exist depicting personified animals and animal/human hybrids. It's as if the desire to adopt the mannerisms of our feral counterparts is as ancient as humanity itself. If I'm being analytical here, I'd posit that it's likely born out of a place of wonder and curiosity, of which humans no doubt excel in. I digress. Even though I'm fairly versed in the phenomenon that is furry, I still never considered this anything beyond a hobby, personally speaking. That is, until I realized just how much I could get away with in designing my fursonas. What do I mean by that? Well, the straightforward answer is, there isn't a demand to have them look or function a certain way akin to how we conduct ourselves IRL. In fantasy, I can afford a fresh fit that never gets stained and supports features like ears and a tail magically clipping through them. I can sport a bright, unnatural color pattern dotting my fur. I can even write their own backstories. So that's the broader appeal of the furry fandom to me. It's this ability to mold and bend the sometimes forced constraints we put upon ourselves and our identities. Side note, if you've met me, you'd know that I hold a deep fascination with not only the furry medium, but fantasy as well. I'm talking orcs, goblins, and elves, etc. It's just that, well, the furry fandom is unique in that it's not at all tied to an existing IP like Dungeons and Dragons, for example. This means that there's less restraint on the limits of creativity in this environment. Of course, no one is going to hold you back if you want to put your own spin on a quote-unquote prototypical fantasy race such as this right here. I could talk about the differences between each community all day, but I'll save it for another video. I hope that your patience wearing thin was enough for me to completely sidestep the need for a proper segue and instead just jumping right into the development of my 3 sonas. 3 is correct because, duh, you can have more than one. I'm not going to waste too much time going over every thought I had in making them, but I will outline some general feelings I had and why I felt the need to design the latter 2. Now, we began with my stand-in for needing a fursona early on in the fandom, Ramen Duke. Or just Duke, the dragon. Not that one. So the idea of him was initially inspired by my love of dragons and little beyond that. I do think, however, that some of my 18-year-old angst and just overall feelings of ineptitude as a fresh high school graduate did bleed into the design a bit. He is quite soft and stout for someone who is in the gene pool of dragon. And for a time, that was kind of how I saw myself. Like, feeling so small and meek, having been thrust into a world full of already blazing, successful, business-minded creators. All in all, this guy never really left me, and in fact, he has since evolved into the main character of a visual novel series that is currently in the works. But this transition has, as a result, pretty much closed that chapter of my life where Ramen Duke was my working avatar for all my online activities. Next up, we have Mark, who, as you can probably tell, has more lasting power, yet distinctly contrasts with Duke's design. But that didn't come without its own set of challenges, which I'll get into later. My thinking here was that I needed a more concrete solution to a fursona if I was to stay in the fandom, which I was still on the fence about at the time. The choice of species was a little inspired by Beta Ada the Lotus video on kangaroo fursonas, but aside from that, it just made sense. I mean, kangaroos, they're fun, buoyant, eclectic, silly, and no such qualities more emphasized than in Mark's design. So I was pretty sold on Mark taking the reins and becoming the sole representation of me and my brand. And then I got a job at Walmart. I know, threw you through a loop there, but hear me out. The experience I had at Walmart was sort of like a perfect storm of emotions building up and up to the point where they were no longer recognizable as distinct feelings from one another. Dysphoria. It had finally reared its ugly head. The anxiety of having that constant exposure to people outside of my home, heightened by not having the freedom to conceal parts of myself that I didn't want to be seen, such as my head. The unfamiliarity of being in an ugly bright blue corporate vest, baggy cargo pants, and clunky work shoes. The demand to have a constant dialogue with employees and customers when you loathe the sound of your voice and what comes out. It was all pecking away at me, exposing a deep underlying frustration with the person I had, for so long, known myself to be. The foundation was just all wrong. Upon realizing this, I would enter a long period of identity crises fueled by my newfound understanding of dysphoria and its waking effects on me. My sense of gender took the heaviest beating. I had avoided the discussion of gender with myself up to that point. I was fortunate enough to hum along in blissful ignorance of the raw mental anguish plaguing many genderqueer and trans individuals because I simply thought I had little to add to those conversations. But it was my time. My egg, as we call it, was ready to be cracked. That's where we're introduced to Ike. They're this little dude you keep seeing popping in and out of the frame. And yeah, I'll admit, we don't bear much of a resemblance, currently speaking anyways, but at the time, I needed a radical reimagination of the person I could strive towards. And notice how I referred to them by they-them pronouns? Well, there you go. I'm non-binary. The curtains have been pulled. But not to swerve off course and have this being a coming out video, I instead want to focus on what introducing them to the equation did for my mental health. If Mark represented the mask side of me, then Ike was my other effeminate half. They're soft, pretty, flowery, mysterious, and above all deeply in tune with their emotions. Speaking of in tune, their design is a huge love letter to the music that made me, shoegaze and indie garage rock in particular. I think they really fit the look, I guess you could say. And I felt like mentioning that because music is pretty much a core part of my identity, as weird as that is to say out loud. And since identities are what we're on about in this video, well, you get the idea. So that's the abridged story of how my 3 fursonas came to be, and they all lived happily ever after in harmony. Except no, they didn't. Now, not to get all surreal on you all, but what happened next is best visualized like this. The 2 aforementioned sides of me, Mark and Ike, were not getting along. Imagine a tug-of-war match where the 2 were fiercely competing for title of Maarzkid's fursona. And I guess Duke is over here watching the whole thing like, glad that's not me anymore. And go figure, I should have seen this coming. Having that level of polarity running deep within these 2 patented designs who are both supposed to represent me? Yeah, despite feeling like Ike was a more true direction to take initially, something still kept pulling me back to Mark. Who knows, maybe I'm simply faking all this hubbub about my gender expression. Of course, that's the compulsive lie we teach ourselves in order to, I guess, help us with the decision to undergo a gender transformation. But for me, this back and forth conflict did hint at there possibly being a more neutral, meeting in the middle solution to all this confusion I was having. So it was clear to me that I had to make some compromises to both designs. The results, well, they were subtle, but I think they both achieved their own levels of androgyny, which better reflected how I act and dress IRL. In fact, I literally own both these outfits. I've chirped all video long about this, but I think that's the great thing about owning a Fursona. Fursonas, and to a larger extent, any kind of avatar used on the internet, are like the Mr., Mrs., and Mixes potato heads of self-exploration. Weird summation of things, but it fits. And like I alluded to earlier, there is an absolute flip ton of art out there depicting these characters whom we create, captured in various different scenarios. Speaking on behalf of fellow furries, this practice results in feelings of comfort and pride when we gaze upon these brief works knowing that we are them and they are us. And I'm not even just talking about Rule 34 or any other explicative that I'm gonna need to censor out. I've had so many friends commission me pieces involving their sonas, wearing or practicing something which gives them a sense of euphoria, both gender and otherwise. I myself am addicted to making this genre of art involving my Roo or Skunk. Just look at this piece of Ike just chilling in the autumn vibes. So good. Again, I digress. Designing a fursona can be one of the most liberating activities for anyone, really. But I think the queer LGBTQ youth population in particular can benefit from artistically being able to visualize aspects of their identity in a positive light. As well, they are able to explore outlets which they might be privy to before they are safe/comfortable to present their true selves fully in the real world. So I definitely wouldn't gawk at the influx of the collectively coined sparkle dog species on Fur Affinity and otherwise, because inside every neon cherry funk colored circus jackal is a kid just trying to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. Or in other words, what feels right to them. Unless you're 32 with one of those, then you a real freak. Anyways, I hope I followed some cohesion in this. It's been a long time since I've actually written an essay-style script. I'll have more in-depth videos covering all sorts of LGBTQIA aspects in the fandom and in comics especially on the horizon. It's something I definitely want to do anyways, but I will say I've got some big life decisions to make in the short term which may affect my output. But if you did make it this far, I just want to say I love you. As a friend. Okay, this is weird. And a like or subscribe would be super appreciated, so I may actually feel like I'm on a solid track with something. Shout out to my fellow ADHDers out there. I've got some big ideas that may also involve partnering up with other small creators on this platform, so that's something. And I'm always backlogged with speed paints, so those aren't going away. I guess I have to prepare an outro. You know what? Big cheers. Y'all have a fluffy day.